Hey everyone! All right, so once a month, we give everyone a chance to hear what a full episode sounds like, bonus content and all. So today's Ask Ann Anything question is from a college student asking advice on the right balance of schoolwork and a social life. And as you'll hear, we have the perfect co host to help answer this. And in other big news, we've officially partnered with a dedicated ad rep. This is very exciting, who's helping bring on advertisers that we actually like. So we're being very intentional about the ads that we choose. And I promise you're not going to hear anything about dubious supplements or intentional weight loss. You will probably hear a lot about dogs. And while we are so grateful for these sponsors, we also understand some listeners might prefer an ad-free experience. That's always been a feature of the paid subscriptions. That plus you get all the bonus content. So if you like what you hear and you want to make sure you always get the full episode, head to culturestudypod.substack.com and become a paid subscriber. And as always, if you are already a subscriber to the Culture Study newsletter, you get a huge deal on the podcast subscription. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy today's show. My first question, though, is how do I say Paul Mescal's name? Because I think Americans say it incorrectly, right?
I'm not sure either. Because it's like not a crazy common name.
Yeah.
Like I've heard people say Mescal and Mezcal. Yes. I've heard all kinds of pronunciations from Irish people and non-Irish people alike. So I think go with God on that one, honestly.
Yeah, it's not like it's like an Irish name that like somehow Americans aren't getting like some sort of weird like.
No, he's our first mezcal, I think. I say mezcal, but like I'm not thinking about it very.
I'm just gonna say it and then just go with it because that is the common pronunciation.
Yeah, it's not like with Saoirse Ronan where we had to like really tell everyone.
Yeah, or even like I feel like every American kid or many American kids have a story of like thinking Sean was seen, like S-E-A-N. Yeah. So like people learn these things. We're not ridiculous. Hi everyone, this is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
My name is Karen Donahue. I'm an author and a podcaster, most recently of The Rachel Incident and the pop culture podcast Sentimental Garbage.
And a huge Culture Study favorite, I have to say that now, when we mentioned just kind of like offhandedly that you were coming on the show, like people lost their shit. So we're very
Are you for real? That's amazing.
Yes,
I love that.
Rachel Incident shows up so much in the What Are You Reading threads for the last couple of months. Like people are obsessed with it. I think a lot of this has to do with there are a lot of millennial readers amongst the Culture Study readership. And then people are just such fans of the podcast too. So this is just perfect cross.
Oh, that really is music to my ears. Thank you so much. And like it feels so fitting that we're talking specifically about like the Irishification of American culture.
Yeah.
Because I think there's like something, this happens very frequently where like Irish artists will most often go to England because it's our next door neighbor and it's the next place that has the most artistic and cultural opportunities. And like very often we will flop in the UK, but then but if like we get to the point where the work is big enough that it can get an American release, more often we'll find a lot more luck over there, which I find sort of fascinating.
Yeah, no, and we're going to talk about what I think sometimes like veers into a fetishization, but also has a lot to do with Irish Americans and understanding of self and that sort of thing. Yeah. But I also have to say that the genesis of this episode actually goes back to the very beginning of the podcast when Melody and I were trying to come up with ideas for like our initial episodes. And I was like, Melody, Paul Mescal. And she's like, ew, gross, whatever. And I was like, no, no, he's the hottest contemporary. Like, yes, he is significantly younger than me, but like he is my like forever young. Like I am always going to be 24 and this is always going to be the type of person that I'm going to have it for. And she was like, there's nothing to talk about. And we kept being like, to listeners, who should be our co-host? And no one had any ideas. And then suddenly we were like, oh, an Irish person who writes about and podcasts about pop culture. Like, what if you would want to do one? And you're like, I don't know much about Paul. And we're like, okay, Irishification of pop culture. Let's expand.
I feel so bad that I couldn't like verify it all to Melody that like Paul Mescal is a good topic of conversation. I'm really very sorry. I got nothing.
No, but like this fits. I told Melody to tell you that I wanted to do this topic, this broader, expanded topic, because I weirdly took several Irish film studies classes
Oh
when I
wow.
was a graduate student. So I've watched a ton of Irish film and also read a ton of Irish literature. I took an Irish literature class as an undergrad, and that like expanded my interest. And once you know some of like the canonical and historical things, it also makes additional
Yeah.
historical stuff more accessible to you, right? Because I feel like sometimes people are like, I don't know anything
Yeah.
about the Troubles. I can't watch any Irish anything, which is false, but like it does make
Yeah,
a lot of
totally. And
other
I think
texts
that
more
like,
accessible.
pop culture in that way, and I'm including sort of literature in that, like it is guilty of like creating myths about places, and like that those aren't limited to Ireland. Like we have myths about
Totally.
every country on earth. We have ideas about how they should be that have been built by pop culture. Like I was just in Norway and I was amazed to see how much it was like Frozen 2. Like truly. And there's like an unbelievable amount of like satisfaction that comes from when something it feels like what it thought it might be in your brain. But like what and like maybe people could call that like sort of
Yeah.
limiting of cultures, but I also think, what that does is like would so many people know about, for example, the Chinese Revolution if they haven't read Wild Swans? Like pop culture and literature is so often our first touch point
Right.
for getting to know countries we've never been to before. What then becomes hard is when it becomes our last touch point. Do you know what I mean? It's like when people watch
Yes.
Derry Girls, for example, and they
Right.
assume that's contemporary Ireland now, as opposed to like a specific part of Ireland during a very specific time, you know?
Right, or even just the generalization of, like, all of
Yeah.
Ireland, and forgetting not just, like, Northern Ireland and how that's different, but also just, like, different parts of a country and how class and race and all of those things intersect with all of that.
Yeah, like it's crazy. I saw an article about this the other day. Not, and it was quite a few weeks ago now at this point. But New York Magazine ran this huge special, and it was around the time where you'd reached out to me about Paul Mescal, and I sort of counter pitched, can we talk about the kind of Irishification of American pop culture? Because I saw this huge spread about like how Irish actors, Irish writers, Irish creators were sort of taking over the landscape. We're so hot right now. They were,
Oh, yeah, it was, like, all of them connected, right? It
yes,
was like a spider web.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
totally. And they referred to this kind of, these actors like Barry Keoghan and Paul Mescal as like part of the crack pack, as in crack spelled CRAIC, which
Yeah,
is like I
yeah.
looked at that phrase for so long. I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Like I should be offended, but I think it's kind of clever.
I'm like, did an Irish person write this, or did it, like, someone who just knows, like, that these people
No,
are
God,
Irish write?
no. But the something I said in the kind of byline, which I found really fascinating, was like, how is a country the size of Indiana having this much of an impact on contemporary culture? And it really brought into focus for me, like, oh yeah, like the absolute to me the unfathomable hugeness of America versus the tininess and the localness of Ireland,
Mhm.
and like I my book was really, it came out in 2023, right? The Rachel incident came out in 2023, but this summer has been, because things take a while to release internationally, it came out in France this summer, and Spain and Germany, and I was touring in a lot of those places last year in order to get the word out. And the impression from sort of the European markets are like, the question I got absolutely everywhere was like, "What's the fucking deal?" Like saying, "Why do you
Really?
guys get so much attention?" And like, there are more people who speak
Huh.
Catalan than are Irish. Like, so like it's and like, how
Right.
many Catalan authors do you know of? Probably none. But I'd wager none. And like, you know,
That's so interesting. Okay, I'm gonna pause this because I think we're gonna get into this all in our
sure.
questions and answering our questions, because I think that there's some reasons for this. But okay, first question, great way for us to get into all of these conversations comes from Alicia.
First, what's the origin story of Americans' collective fixation with Irish celebs? And why has it blossomed so much in the past few years? And I'm not just thinking Paul Mescal, but also the rabidity of Cillian Murphy's fans, post-Peaky Blinders, and in the last Oscars cycle. Is it shows like Dairy Girls and Bad Sisters giving us broader cultural exposure to Ireland? Is it just the stereotype of Americans connecting with their roots? Does Ireland's history of oppression resonate with us, justifiably or not, leading to a whole blanket category of feel-good obsessing? Or do we feel some kind of solidarity against the British? Second, what happened to Enya?
Okay, so we're going to do the Enya question
wow.
first because I profiled Enya and I met her. I came to
How
Ireland.
was she?
Yeah, she was amazing. She just like doesn't do computers basically. She's like, I check my email once a week. And she sells so many records. She sold and she continues to sell so many records that she has like a very old school, deal with a major label. And like I went to a listening party
No.
at like a beautiful, beautiful old embassy up on the Upper East Side in New York. And like everyone was fawning and she walked out like but someone was like holding her hand as she like walks down the stairs like she's in, I don't know, like descending a staircase. Like it was very out of 1990.
Wow.
And I think she still very much lives her life that way. She has this husband and wife duo that she has collaborated with for years, and she lives in a castle that like it's bigger. It outshadows Bono's castle.
Not
Like
Bono's
she is
castle.
so rich.
She's so rich.
She's so rich. Here's a question, actually. How popular was she in Ireland? Because she was, so ubiquitous. She was everywhere in the United
That's
States.
so interesting. 'Cause I was thinking a lot about Enya in the lead up to this, and I think she was definitely popular to a point, but because I think specifically what Enya was sort of calling to and speaking to was this wider thing that was happening in the 90s of kind of world, quote unquote, in quotes, world music and like or new age music or whatever that specifically spoke to kind of crystals and like health food stores and shops that have CDs defined by mood at the counter and like a big cookie wrapped in cling film for sale. Like that is the world I place.
And like nutritional yeast.
Yes.
And the entire store smells like cumin.
Yes, that's
Yeah, yes.
totally. And like I think for sure people were supportive. But I mean, this was the 90s, and obviously, and I'm born in 1990, so I was a child. I don't remember people being crazy about her. I remember her being in the background. But I think again, like because of the size of the US and because of like, I guess, if you are the main exporter of culture in the world, which is America, and so much of the cultural mood sort of drips down from there, I suppose, from where you are, and I think what was happening to some extent or another, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there was such a kind of a 90s sort of megalomaniac cynicism happening, the sort of the Starbucksification of the US and everything, which I didn't experience firsthand, but I just sort of know existed from like watching singles or whatever. And people like Enya seemed like a kind of a counterbalance to that. Would you say?
Well, she was elevator music that was also unique in some way. And so similar to the success of, say, the Benedictine monks who'd had like a very successful chanting album around the same time as the peak of Enya's popularity, or someone like Enigma, another very popular early 90s like mood music.
Or Yanni.
Yes, or Yanni. So popular. People don't know how popular Yanni was. But Enya too, like some of her songs were her like speaky, just kind of chanting words, but a lot of them also included Gaelic, and she would sing like some of her songs were also traditional Irish songs, and it felt, I think, like an accessible touch point of like, oh well, this isn't just elevator music. Like this is actually like cultural in some
Yeah,
way.
there's a profundity to it and there's layers to it and it feels like it comes
Yeah,
from
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah.
And like to your guests' other questions,
Oh yeah, we should
no,
go
but I
there
do
because
think
they're
this kind of
everything.
links in a way because I was thinking a lot about it in the run up to this about like how, because I was talking to a comedian who's quite famous over here called Dara O'Brien, and he's in his 50s. I was at this kind of very Irish event with him, and and we were talking about the whole like, oh my God, we're so hot right now. Everyone wants a slice of us, hello, or whatever. And he sort of looked at me and another young writer, not young, I mean, we're in our 30s, another sort of millennial writer, and he said, "Oh, you sweet summer children, this is my third go round of this. This is like my third
Totally.
like turn of
Right, because the
this."
90s, the crying game was such a phenomenon. And then there were a bunch of other Irish focused narratives, but also Irish stars and Irish stories were very much in the forefront alongside the news of what was actually happening in Ireland in terms of politics
Yeah.
and the war and everything like that. Like, yeah, this is definitely at least like there was that time right there. But then I also feel like there was like a resurgence around once late
Yes.
2000s, early
Yeah,
2010s.
I
Do you know
mean,
what I mean?
like, not, I mean, lots of things win Best Original Songs and then we never hear from them again. But, like, once won Best
Yeah.
Original Songs at the Oscar. And
Yeah.
that was, I mean, I think that I was still living in Ireland during that time. I now live in London for context. But that was such a huge moment, I remember. And it was also, Damien Rice was happening around the same time as that as well.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he had gone super international. And like I remember but the feeling with Once was so strange because Glenn Hansard, who is the star of that movie and the composer of that song, is this lead singer of this band called The Frames. And like that was a band that was just like, if you left your house in the morning, you could probably catch a Frames gig on the way to work, Like I said, it was impossible
Totally.
not to see the
Totally.
Frames. Like,
So you're like, oh, it's just that guy. And now he's like a global
right, and what was
star.
so crazy is that like if you were a fan of them and if you followed them, and it was kind of impossible not to because they were always playing a gig at the end of your road, like you had this real sense because you knew people who knew the band, and the band was large and had violinists and stuff in
Yeah.
it, that they were always like would partially move over to the UK for a while to try and make it, and then they get booted out and have to come back again. So they were always kind of like pinging back and forth. And then they, in this weird way, they just sort of like hopscotched the UK entirely, and then had this like phenomenal like movie and an Oscar nomination, and like. Yeah, like I had a friend who was a good friend of Glenn's, and he was like, "Yeah, we tease him that he has like the same amount of Oscars as Leonardo DiCaprio."
Oh, and also, why am I blanking on Carey Mulligan's husband's band's name?
Oh, they're not Irish.
They're not Irish. They sound so Irish.
Excuse you, Anne.
They sound so Irish. You have to agree with me. They
Oh
sound
yeah,
so-
Mumford and
yes,
Sons. Yes,
yes.
they
Like, and their
are
look,
not.
like, is like, or what an American like me is like. Oh yeah, they're
Yeah.
Irish.
I'm so sorry to disappoint you. They're
Yes.
from Sussex, and actually, I think they caught a lot of flack in Ireland for a sort of the kind of Irish minstrelsy, I suppose you could call them.
Totally.
Yeah, but like you get that these waves of fascinations with the country. I mean, I've never witnessed it the way I am right now, and maybe I just feel that way because I am creating work that is benefiting
Yeah.
from this kind of sense of like the rising tide is really lifting all boats, and those boats are specifically my books and podcasts,
Yeah.
and which I'm delighted. But it really it is amazing to me about like when I was first publishing as a writer. I published my first book when I was 28, and that was that's 2018, so it was around the time of Me Too. And the only thing I ever answered questions about was being a woman, being a young woman, and abuse and Me Too. And it was like that was the identifier that was like interesting
Right.
about me when I was answering questions about my work. And then in the last kind of 3 years, it seemed that the only when I'm in sort of journalist situations, and it's interesting because I was a journalist, so it's interesting, and I'm sure you have the same thing when you're promoting your work, how you shift from either side of the fence.
Yep.
How like the majority of the questions will be about being Irish, why Irish people are so fascinating to everybody else, like how my Irishness affects my work, how Sally Rooney affects my work. Like
Yep.
it's all this kind of stuff. It's so weirdly, because I've spent, your nationality, I'm sure you probably agree, it's like your eye color. It's like this thing you were just born with. It doesn't feed into how you work. You don't think about it when you're working.
Yeah.
But then when it becomes an identifier of your work, it kind of forces you to think about it in like a very granular way.
Does the Irish press ever ask you about the Irishness of your work?
Yes, but in a different way. So to clarify, like, delighted to be asked about my work at all. Like, it's not a privilege every creator gets. But when the Irish press, and I'd actually like to talk about them a little bit more in a minute because it is kind of fascinating. They will ask me about, like, when do you plan on coming home? What is it like for you overseas? How do people perceive your Irishness overseas? So like this obsession, and I think this is probably in the same in every kind of small artistic market. Like I'm sure if I was an Austrian writer, I would give sort of, interviews to the Austrian press about how my Austrianness is received abroad. Like people are kind of obsessed with looking at themselves with the kind of lens of how they think the world looks at them,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was thinking just because like when I did international press for Can't Even, it brought home the Americanness of like what I was talking about in a way that the US press had not really interrogated.
Really?
Yeah, like it made me think outside of my own experience so much, and then also just the initial reception to like the article how millennials became the burnout generation. Like because BuzzFeed at that time was so incredibly global, I received so many emails globally, and it was always fascinating to see like where are these clustering. And I got a lot from
Yeah.
people from India, and I got a lot from people in Brazil, which I think because a lot of like the components of American capitalism and hustle culture and stuff had transferred to the Brazilian economy. And then I got so many from people in Dublin. And I
That
say that
makes a lot of sense to
specifically,
me.
right?
Yeah.
Right? Because you have
Yeah.
the tech industry that has transferred over there.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, so that, like, it made me think about not only like how I was speaking in many ways in that initial article to an American experience and how doing press in other ways allowed me to think differently. Like in Spain, the millennials aren't a generation. They have a generation that they call I think it's the crystal generation. Like basically speaking to like the fragility of this generation. And their generations are much
Oh,
more defined by like when they emerged from fascistic rule, right? Like that's how they think
of
about the
course. Yeah.
generations instead of like 1980 as an arbitrary understanding of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really fascinating to like sort of what you think is being like, because I guess because you're online all day and,
Yeah.
and you sort of see everyone chiming with you, and you forget to think of extremely localized points of view on generations. Like I was talking to a German friend the other day who is talking. She's talking to me about how there's a lot of conversation going on right now about how the millennial descendants, or the people who were basically babies when the wall came down,
Yeah.
are now at an age where their parents are dying. Or not dying, but they're thinking about naturally like what their inheritance is going to be. And obviously, if you grew up in the communist side of Germany, you're not going to inherit
Yeah.
anything because your parents lived under a communist regime. And whereas in the West, you will stand to inherit a lot. And so she was telling me about like how it's not so much a generational difference as still being an Eastern and Western divide. And like I was like, oh wow, we don't have anything like that. And I guess this is like a really long way of saying, I guess countries are different from one another.
That's a good conclusion. We answered her question. I guess countries are different.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
to go back to the question, I will say that one of the things I think of immediately when we think about like the popularity of Irish culture is I think of The Quiet Man, which is a John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara movie from
Oh
1952,
yeah.
which was tremendously successful here, has all sorts of like weird depictions of how Ireland is or how Ireland was.
Uh-huh.
And Maureen O'Hara was a massive star, but
Oh
it's
yeah.
more thinking about like Irish Americanness translated on the screen as Irishness. Does that make sense? Like Irish
Yes,
American
yes.
memories translated on the screen and represented as Irish.
Yeah, I find this so fascinating, like lining up all these sort of eras of cultural interest, like the 50s and the Quiet Man, and then like thinking about the 90s and Enya and the Cores and all that, and sort of like trad infused pop music and that kind of thing. Then if you think about like that sort of once moment and
Yep.
Damien Rice and all that,
Yep.
and then now, and it's like the fascination has always been there, but like the need to be fascinated changes. Like fantasizing about a country you've never been to, which we all do in some way or another, is a form of fantasy. And so if you're in the world of fantasy, it means that you're making up for some kind of lack you feel elsewhere. And I think that thing I said about new age culture possibly being an antidote to consumerism, I think could be a thing. I also think that kind of Damien Rice, Glenn Hansard, simple, pared back, kind of scratchy looking man in a big coat playing a guitar. It feels very recession-y, you know?
Yeah.
It feels a little global recession-y. It seems a bit like, can we reassure ourselves that even if we have to make our lives simpler, they can still be good and true, and maybe we can find earnesty and honesty in that, and like, do we need to go back to basics on this?
Yeah. No, Once is such a post-recession film too.
Yeah.
And also a post-EU film, and like the way that it depicts but does
Yes.
not interrogate, like it's not like a film about immigration, but it is a film about a post-EU Ireland. And so do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
totally. It's totally lives in that
Yeah.
context. And then like I feel if you were to rub that against like the enormous fascination now, and I really do, maybe it's just because media is bigger, maybe it's because I'm seeing more of it because of my job, but I feel like the fascination with Irishness feels to me a little bit like a really comfortable way to be white in a way.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously there are Irish people of all kinds of skin tones and creeds and whatever, but it is mostly associated with being very, very white. And like it's like there are so many people who, in the last sort of decade or so have really become switched on to like, oh wow, to live in this body, in this skin, in this world that I'm in, it means to have like inherently stolen from others in some way, in some way, implicit or explicit. And like I think a lot of people are sort of managing that psychological burden in different ways. And so I can so understand why Irishness would be even more attractive in that context, because like we speak English, we're very white, and yet we're colonized and starved to death and all that. And then you layer the immigration thing on top of it, of course, and yeah. But that's my theory. What do you
Yeah,
think?
no, I think that that's real. And I think most people would be like, huh, that's weird. I don't think that I identify with Irishness because of whiteness. For a white person, there is all sorts of complication with trying to be really into, let's say, Indian culture.
Yeah,
Like you have to tread
yeah,
this line of like, am I being appropriative? Like, am I being fetishistic? Or am I being orientalist? And I think that that is less the case for a white person, again, if they're dealing with Irishness.
yeah. Because like ultimately, who cares? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like if like a nice, well-meaning American comes over and buys a dumb hat and wants to sort of like drink their Guinness up at the bar and talk to the bartender, like there's nothing like truly harmful about that. Like the bartender's making money from the Guinness. Like we're happy to have them. We'll tell them whatever about their ancestors. Like it's so fine.
Do you think that the TV part of this has something to do with it? Because something like Dairy Girls, I don't think Americans would really have access to pre-streaming. Like you could get DVDs of
Yeah.
it, right? Like if you were like really into like niche European TV shows, but it would not be like something that people binge the way that they binge The Office.
It's crazy the Dairy Girls thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's so wonderful, isn't it? That just like you wouldn't. There's no planning for a thing like that,
Yeah.
There because like how many small sitcoms that are cheaply made with mostly unknown actors sort of come out that's about a very local place and becomes a very dear thing to that local place, and then nobody ever hears of it, and then Dairy Girls just exploding has. And I really do think that like Dairy Girls kind of walked so Say Nothing could run.
Yeah.
Like it really proved that people were not just willing to, but are gagging to learn about like cultures that aren't their own and histories that aren't their own.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think like TV is a huge part of it for sure. Like, and the whole thing of like a rising tide lifting all boats. Like my first book that came out in America was a sort of a fantasy YA called All Our Hidden Gifts. It was about like, tarot cards and schoolgirls and all kinds of stuff. And the cover of the American edition had like an Irish girl in a school uniform on the cover. And I just like, every review and every blurb was like, it's like Dairy Girls meets Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And it wasn't those things, but it was just, but it's that thing of like, the signifier was enough, and like it went to the like New York Times bestseller list, kind of riding that wave of like that Dairy Girls interest. And it's incredible to me how little it actually takes. Like you can spend, and I'm sure you've had this experience, you can spend like months of your life trying to like come up with some kind of PR strategy of like what will make something work. And then like just something comparable happens at the right time, and then off it goes.
Right,
and
that
hooray.
people can reference and be like, I like that thing, so maybe I'll like this thing too.
Yeah, I mean, answer your question, like, yeah, like that show continues to like amaze me, and like it's so inspiring. Like it's so incredible. Yeah, I love that show.
So our next question is about another theory about Irishification, but will also prompt us to look a little further back. So this one's from Katie.
Do you think Irish pop culturification started with Sally Rooney's novels and the publishing industry treating her as a literary it girl? Does it have a longer history? If so, how far back are we going? I feel like the first or most prominent Irish American was JFK, and the Kennedys made Irish heritage cool in the United States.
It's interesting. I don't think of Kennedy as like prominently Irish so much as prominently Catholic.
Oh my God, we think of him as prominently Irish.
That is really interesting.
Like, you spent time in Ireland. You must have entered a pub that has a picture of JFK in it.
I mean, like, there's so many. That's true. That's true.
Look, I had to stay at a hotel this Christmas because my family home was just too full of new children, and the my hotel room in Cork had a picture of JFK's motorcade above the bed. Like, remember that movie? Remember that Natalie Portman movie, Jackie?
Yes. Yes.
I was home when that came out, and me and my dad went to go see it in Cork, and people were sitting in the aisles. People were fucking obsessed. We are cracked about that whole situation still. Like, we are fucking mad about it. Like, I have a friend who grew up in the north, and he always says, you know, if somebody was Protestant or Catholic because they have a plate with the Queen on it if they were Protestant, and a plate with JFK on it if they were Catholic. But I think to go back to the literature question, I think it's a really fascinating one, because I think what it sort of often fails to take into account when people are like, oh wow, like Sally Rooney, and now I guess all these other guys as well, kind of thing. Right. Is that like we are really good at growing novelists and playwrights and all kinds of artists, because we have like a really robust artistic ground system. Like we have like for such a small country, like we really do invest in the arts. Like last year, for example, I think it was end of 2023 to 2024, and they just extended it, but they introduced a kind of a trial universal basic income for artists, and it was done on like a lottery basis. So I think it's like you get the equivalent of 16,000 euros a year, which like you still have to, it's like a lottery system, and not everybody who applied got it, but I think something like 1 in 5 people did get it. Yeah. And and like that's obviously you still have to, it's an expensive country, you still probably have to work, but you also have money and time and resource to work on your art, and that art is taken seriously. And that's, you see that coming up in all different places. Like, for example, before Sally Rooney was Sally Rooney, she was an editor of a literary magazine called The Stinging Fly. That's incredibly famous in Ireland. And like, you know, it's a country of 6 million people. To have like an incredibly famous literary
magazine.
Yeah, it's like cool. It's fucking cool. And like, I think it's always dangerous to single out one person and make them the kind of the anointee. Because I don't know Sally Rooney, but from interviews I've read with her, it clearly makes her incredibly uncomfortable, the amount of fame she's received. And I think, yes, you can call one person the anointee of all culture, and put incredible pressure on them, or you could study the system that person comes from and then like try and see if you can push for that kind of system where you live too.
Yeah. No, and like that's so important because I think sometimes people are like, "Oh, well, the Irish produce so much art because they've struggled and like they've, you know what I
No.
mean? Like just like this very like facile understanding of like if you have struggle in your heritage, then you will produce amazing art. It's like no,
Yeah.
there's also a system that makes it possible for you to produce art full time, even like that's
Yeah,
so important.
like you're so correct. Oh my God, I hate that so much, this idea of like struggle in art. Or like the kind of idea that like, oh well, the thing is that we come from this Celtic tradition of singers and poets and
Yeah.
the idea that it's kind of like in the blood
I
somehow,
mean,
I find
everyone has
so
that
cringe.
tradition. Also has that tradition.
Like literally
Oh,
you find me a culture that doesn't sing. Like
it doesn't have ballads. Like you just have Celine Dion instead of like, and I think that people
yeah.
there is something about like the minor key of like Irish ballads that make people think that it's like more, I don't know, something. We forgot to mention Sinead O'Connor in the 1990s.
Oh yes. Yeah,
But
for
that
sure.
what made me think of that is there's a TikTok like format where people like there's if someone says like can you explain to me something and then they play like the beginning and I don't know if it's Sinead, it might be someone else where it says like well first of all we have to talk about the famine. Do you know what I'm talking
Oh yeah.
about?
I love it so much. And like the meme is always like me talking to my English boyfriend.
Yes.
Like, well, first of all, we have to talk about the famine, and
Yes.
second of all, that there was no famine.
But I did love this point, and this comes up in the Rachel incident, where the character in the book is talking about how like the idea of Irish oppression became popular in relatively recently. Like the dad in the book is like, "What are you talking about? Like we should have planted other crops instead of
Yeah.
like talking about the famine."
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you brought that up. You were the first person who's ever brought that scene up with me, and it
Wow.
felt so important to me at the time. Because I remember very specifically during that time having a boyfriend who was telling me all about like how the famine was this sort of planned genocide essentially,
Yeah.
and like people still debate whether or not that's true, but the kind of fact remains is that the reason that the Irish people were so I can't believe I'm on an American podcast talking about potatoes. I can't
I can.
I just like hovered above my head and I was like whoa. The reason that Irish people were so dependent on that one crop was because the land was so heavily colonized that we were essentially every person in Ireland had like a subsistence farming thing. They had a tiny plot like outside their door where they could grow like one thing, and that was the only thing they could grow. Maybe if they were lucky, they'd also have like one pig.
Yeah.
And then everything else, every like vast tract of land was owned by sort of planters and English landlords and all of that. And so when the potato blight struck, people couldn't eat the thing they were growing, but they also couldn't eat any of the food that was growing very plentifully and very well in the land. And like I remember him explaining that to me and explaining the way that like Queen Victoria didn't like provide any really very much famine relief at all, and how like people who were starving were put to work on like road projects that were like building roads that go nowhere and all this stuff, and how terrible it was. And I remember learning that for the first time at like 20 and being like appalled and saying it to I think probably my own parents and like, guys, did you know about this?
Yeah.
And like maybe it was just them, maybe it was the mood at the time, but I remember like they were so hand wavy. I think because it was such that moment, as it says in the book, that moment was so just a lack of self-esteem was happening throughout the culture because what was happening during the housing crisis. I mean, obviously 2008 hit everybody really hard, but what was happening psychologically with Ireland is that we had kind of created this enormous middle class in
Yeah.
the space of about 10 years.
Yeah.
And then we sort of lost it overnight. And the kind of the shame of that was very strong,
Right.
you know?
Well, and even so, I'm correct that that's the Celtic tiger, right?
Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Well, and like the fact that you call it like the Celtic tiger, and you're like, oh, the tiger is sick. Like it's just like
The
that.
tiger is sick. The tiger's a rut now.
Yes, yes, yeah, and I think that like obviously the global recession hit every country, and like all of these variously affecting ways, but like that idea, like we just got it. Like we
Yeah,
just
we literally just got espresso just now. Like, and now we can't have it anymore. Like, I remember, like, again, I was born in 1990. I remember the first time I had pizza out of the delivery box. Like,
middle class
it was
wonder. Well, that's
it
the
was
thing.
middle class wonder. Like this thing that you would see on American, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and you'd see them all eating that delicious stretchy pizza.
Yep.
Or like Kevin McAllister, a lovely cheese pizza just for me. Just like,
That is a
and, like,
quote
just-
in our house all the time.
Oh my god!
Anytime we take out we call it freezer pizza from the oven, we're like, cheese pizza just for me.
It's oh my god! I'm so glad that's a thing in your house. That's such a thing in my house. A lovely cheese pizza just for me. But yeah, we were like reading about we would see American culture in TV, and then 5 years later we would get some of it, and that was just exciting,
Yep.
and then it sort of like all caught up very quickly, and we just became a modern country,
Yeah.
and then we became a very poor modern country. So it's a wild ride over here.
Yeah. Our next question is about this gap between Irish pop culture and actual Irish culture. Let's hear from Sarah.
I happened to move to Ireland a couple years ago, and what continually surprises me is the distance between the typical American perspective of Irish culture and the reality. Just watch Paul Mescal's recent stint hosting SNL for prime examples of the stereotypes. Ireland is so different from what we experience as quote unquote Irish culture in the US. It's far more nuanced, modern, and deeply independent from the UK. Do you think this Irishification will shift the American understanding of true Irish culture, or will the old stereotypes live on in perpetuity?
So I think that there is always going to be this stereotype that's like the quiet man mixed with like most Americans haven't seen The Wind That Shakes the Barley, but like Irish people dressed in the costumes of The Wind That Shakes the Barley.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also think that there's a new like normal people stereotype that it's just like Irish people are Paul Mescal and his like giant thighs just running around playing rugby.
Giant thighs.
We call them in our house. We call them meaty clackers. Like that's what a giant thigh looks like. Is a meaty clacker.
His meaty clackers.
Yeah.
Oh my god, Anne. I'm obsessed. That's so good.
But yeah, so
Meaty
so what
clackers.
do you think? Like the Sally Rooney style, like has that subsumed some of that old stereotype, or do you not see that happening yet?
You know what? It's almost too soon to tell, right? Like, because like right now we're in the grips of like what is a very well-meaning fad. Do you know what I mean? Like, and like, and so we won't know like in what will last a bit. For sure, I think like the sense of Ireland's sort of ruralness and ancientness, I think will last a very long time.
Yeah.
Like that will have a long shadow because like the fact remains that like there are still places in Ireland that are a bit like that. There are like,
Yeah.
cutie little towns and like farmers who speak 7 sentences a fucking year.
Yeah.
And like they're like, that is like, every year, like another 155,000 Americans come to Ireland to find their ancestors, and some of them do find their ancestors. And like I would never deny anybody on this earth the privilege and the beauty of again, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, of going to a country and it being like what you felt it should be like.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's a beautiful thing,
And that, but then also go to the other places that aren't like what you thought it was going to be like.
Or don't. I don't care.
You're like, just go to Dublin. No, you don't need to go
Oh,
anywhere.
never, do not go to Dublin. I mean, actually, if, I'll answer the rest of the question in a second. But if anyone who's planning a trip to Ireland takes anything from this podcast at all, please just don't go to Dublin. Just don't do it, because like go to Dublin in 1993 if you can. But like, as you said, like the tech sector has taken over to such a point now where like you will get to Dublin, you will go on like the Guinness distillery tour. You will go to a few nice pubs, and after a day and a half, you will run out of things to do because so many things have kind of been leveled just to make way for this tech industry, and like and also for a city that doesn't really have the infrastructure to contain that industry.
Yeah.
So if I were you guys, I would fly into Cork, and I'm not just saying that because I'm from there. Going to Cork is like this like very cute little walkable city. 2 days, get a car, drive to the Ring of Kerry. You'll have like the Irish experience you want to have.
Yeah.
What was the rest of the question?
Will it ever? I think you answered it honestly. You said like, will it shift the American understanding of Irish culture?
Do you know what? I think things like Bad Sisters,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I know has been massive in the
It
States.
has.
I think that's a really gorgeous example of like, yeah, we have this beautiful scenery, but we also have like normal middle class people having trouble with their, brother-in-law.
Yeah, just like
You know what I mean?
murdering.
Yeah, yes, murdering. Like that those episodes where it's like mostly Sharon Horgan in her office, or like
yeah.
Eve Hewson in her failing yoga studio.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like so glad. I'm like, oh, it's so important that they know that we have like offices and yoga studios.
But did you know that everyone also has like swimming coats for the most beautiful swimming hole in the entire world that they like go to together as a family with 5 sisters? Did you also know that?
But the thing is, we do have that too. That's like I do that with my family. Like I really do.
Do you know that they demolished the house that Sharon Horgan's character lives in? Melody told me
What the
this
fuck?
yesterday.
Why?
Yeah, they just like demoed it. They bulldozed it. It's like so beautiful.
Oh my god, that house is on a par with like the Practical Magic house.
Yeah, which I live.
It's like it's really up
I live
there.
right near there.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like this running race that goes like very close by it every single year. Yeah.
Oh my god, that house, man.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So I want to also say, like, and to quote from the Rachel incident, you write that, like, perhaps it's because so many people claim Irishness that we keep putting our private jokes on higher and higher shelves. So you have to ask a member of staff to get them down for you, which is, I guess, kind of what we're doing with this episode. So there are some jokes that I think like people get the joke, and then there's stuff like that I think goes over my head, goes over most people's heads. Like, do you think that there are things that like people don't get? Like in Dairy Girls or Bad Sisters, or I mean, there's jokes in Normal People too, if you look for it hard.
I mean, I don't know. It's not for me to tell what jokes people.
Oh,
aren't
right, because
getting.
you're like,
what do you not get?
No, there's also like, okay, so can you explain like what is crake? Like, what does it actually mean?
Crack.
Crack.
Oh, oh man. Yeah, no. So crack is spelled CRAIC.
Yeah.
It's just oh god. This makes me feel like how Danish people must have felt during the year of Hygge. But like crack is just fun. It's just it literally is just fun. Doing something for the crack means that you're just you're being a little bit mischievous.
Yeah.
Just kind of for the fuck of it,
Yeah,
just doing
yeah.
something for the plot.
Yeah.
Having the crack means you're drinking, but in a way that's like whimsical. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're having like 2 pints with a friend that you didn't mean to have, and you're like, ooh, look at us. And then if you're upgrading from if the crack is getting a bit more serious, then you're on the sesh. Like once you've had like 3-4 pints plus, you're now on the sesh, and that could really go on for a long time. But in general, it just means fun and whimsy.
We call that going to the wedding. Like anything past 5, you're like, oh, did you go to the wedding last night? Because
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way
That's
just to
really
explain. Like it's
nice.
something that happens very rarely, but when it does, like you're on another level and usually like need to get something out of your system.
Yeah, and like nothing can, whether you're at the wedding or you're on the sesh, like nothing can extract you from it once you're in it.
No,
you know?
You can't like have a glass of water and be like, oh, I'm like sober now. Like that doesn't work. So
No. Yeah.
this is a quick one that I feel like is annoying, but also might be amusing coming from you. This comes from Claire, and it's probably a significant reason I have a crush on Paul Mescal. Melody wrote that line. Okay. It's not true. That's not why I like him.
Clackers?
I like his meaty clackers. I like
the
his
meaty clackers.
No.
And the accent. I
She
just
said
assumed.
the question is, why are Irish accents so attractive? Get linguistically nerdy if you like.
Okay, well, I'm not a linguist, but I think on the Paul Mescal thing, it's so funny because obviously that kind of craze for him, it feels like the last one that we had was Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah.
And it's like if you were to take Timothée Chalamet but somehow invert him, And like that would make Paul Mescal in a way. It's
It's
so
like no,
strange.
but it's I mean it's like his character in Normal People in so much as it's like, what if a hot jock was also super sensitive?
Yes,
And
yes,
like
yes,
not in a
yes.
gross way that gave you like the skeeves. Like it was more just like what
What if he wrote
what
poems?
if he wrote
Yeah.
poems? What if he was a single dad? What if he was gay? Like those are all the different realms that he's kind of
Oh my
explored.
God.
What if he was a gladiator?
What? Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's so funny with the exception of like Gladiator, so much of Paul Mescal roles feel like a Paul Mescal dating simulator. You know what I mean? They don't they were never like very plot heavy. It's always just like imagine you're on a date with Paul Mescal and you're in your late teens, or imagine your dad is Paul Mescal. They really do feel like yeah, just dating simulators. But I remember when when this whole thing has been going on,
Yeah.
and to me, it was just like it felt very strange because like when I was growing up, the kinds of boys I was excited by were like, you know, the indie sleaze, the Pete Dohertys, the kind of like, I mean, it's probably why I moved to London. Sort of like I wanted to look at like skinny boys with dyed black hair and like in the MySpace pose. And, like, I wanted, that's what I wanted. And like all I had in my locale was like people who looked like Paul Mescal, just kind of like big old meaty clacker guys who weren't very nice. Like I'm sure he's nice, but like I just kind of associate him with like country lads who just like, you know,
Totally.
they don't you feel like you're kind of talking past them and not with them sometimes,
Yep.
and you don't really have anything in common, and like so I never got it at all. And then and so I could sort of let it sort of pass me by, which is why I sort of didn't
Want to do an episode
nominate
just on
myself.
him.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Didn't want to do an episode on him. And then it was so funny. Like last week, I was with someone who was a producer on Normal People, so like knows Paul quite well at this point. And I said to him, I was like, oh my God, like I just look at Paul's career and I think, God, that must be so stressful. Like it seems like everyone wants a piece of him. It must be really, really difficult for someone like him to go through something like that. And then the producer kind of looked at me askance and was like, not really. He's having a lot of sex and getting free stuff, so I think he's fine. And then like and then like I realized that like even though I thought the Paul Mescal thing hadn't worked on me, it actually had,
Because you
I
with
had
sympathy.
I had this sympathy for like, oh well, he's clearly a sensitive artist who only I get, so I'll feel sorry for him. Even, you know what I mean? Like it's so dumb. It's like, no, he's like a 29-year-old guy who's like getting fucking pussy every day of the week. He's fine. Like,
And gets to like have weird haircuts and like dress
Yeah,
in
and
weird
just can
stuff,
do
and the
no
people are like, yeah,
wrong.
people are like, it looks good on him because he's him.
my
Yeah,
God.
no,
I saw this insane like TikTok that was going around. It was like a behind the scenes for Gladiator, and the horse person was giving an interview about the horses on Gladiator 2, and they were like, the thing is, I've never met anyone who can like really has an instinct for the horses like Paul has. I was like, well, give the fucking guy a break. And like Natalie Portman wetting herself to talk to him. I was like, you're Natalie Portman. You shouldn't care about this boy.
oh no, she gets it. She gets it. She's like, I want to have a cigarette. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna smoke a cigarette with this hot guy. I am Natalie Portman in that scenario. I don't smoke cigarettes. But
Like Natalie Portman, who hadn't smoked since she was like on the set of Black Swan, and now she's like, yeah, I'll smoke with you, Paul.
I have a pack right here.
Like digging into her assistant's hand, get me some cigarettes. Give me some cigarettes.
I do think for a lot of Americans, the Irish accent is part of it.
Oh yes, accent work. That's how we got
I
here.
appreciate
Yeah.
your context of like, maybe this is also why there are American stars who don't do it for me, who might do it for other people because
But I also think it's worth saying that like because Ireland is extremely small, but it's really badly connected. Like you know, there's very little public transport. There was no like real industrial revolution to speak of. So infrastructure that many countries would have gotten in the 19th century only came to Ireland in like 1981. So as like a result of that, it means there's a huge disparity of accents within the island itself.
Yeah.
And so the result of that is like I'm from Cork, but like when I meet people from Donegal, I'm like, oh hello sailor. Like I'm just like
This is like there's still accents still live in the United States, but they are dying as people like just with more mobility and that sort of thing. But when you meet someone who has like a real accent, obviously there's usually some sort of class connotation going on, but there's also like a
yeah.
real charm.
Oh my God. I mean, the best thing that America has ever done for the rest of the world is the Southern accent. Like, are they serious with that thing? Like, it's amazing.
Okay, so we have rounded every corner in in this conversation,
Yeah.
and we have an Ask Ann Anything, which is like our bonus part of the show. We have a question that as soon as it came in, Melody and I were both like, "Oh, this is the perfect question for you to help me answer." So this has nothing to do
Okay.
with Irish pop culture in any capacity, but it is a very like going through shit as a younger person kind of question.
Okay. I would love that.
And just as a reminder, this part of the episode would usually only be for paid subscribers. So if you decide you need all future Ask Ann Anything questions in your life, and they're about all sorts of things, sometimes it's just me and Melody talking about things that she would never tell anyone else. And sometimes it's me and the actual co host. You can go to culturestudypod.substack.com and sign up. All right. This question comes from Clara, and Melody's going to read it.
I just started university last September in London. I've been a high achieving student all my life, but during the last semester, I prioritized other things like making friends and going out, joining and attending societies, and overall settling in a new city. I don't regret my decision, but I feel like I'm letting down myself and my parents by not dedicating enough time to my studies and getting subpar grades. I know I can do better academically. However, I also do not feel completely satisfied with my social life, and I feel that most of my friendships are still very surface level. I don't have a regular friend group. What should I do beginning my second semester? Should I shift focus back to my grades and building study habits, or should I make more friends and strengthen my relationships? Isn't that what university is about? Or can I do both? For context, university in the UK is 3 years with minimal elective classes. All the classes I take are related to my major.
I'm just so honored that this person wants to ask elders for advice here.
I
I
know.
know.
It's so sweet. I can't believe you have like a 20-year-old listening to your podcast.
This is amazing. Thank you.
It's not even a YouTube podcast. Like, you don't even film it.
I know. Never.
Lucky you, Helen Peterson.
My first impulse here is that she should do both. Like, both are possible. It's not an either or.
Yeah, both are absolutely possible, but that's the boring answer.
Yeah,
so
that
like
is. Yes.
but like I would say yeah, in terms of like if this is, let's say this is a person who could only focus on one thing
Yeah.
in their life at a time, which apparently is either partying or studying. I would say the answer, if they have to pick one, is entirely dependent on whether they plan to stay in the UK or whether they plan on going back to the US.
Oh.
Because I will say that I have no idea what it's like to look for a job in the US, but I will say that like unless you have a first from Oxford or Cambridge, nobody gives a rat's ass about anything you did at university over here. Same in England, same in Ireland. And I think this is probably because it's much cheaper,
Yeah.
or definitely it was much cheaper in my time to go to university here, that like it is primarily seen as a place to hone your social skills and to hone your networks, you know, like I remember, and I really sympathize with this asker as well, because like I remember when I moved to the UK from Ireland when I was 21, and like it was so hard to make inroads with people because it felt, specifically in the form of work I was trying to break into in the media,
Yeah.
so many of the people who were privileged enough to work in media at all came from extremely tight networks and were not recruiting for new friends,
Yep.
and had often gone to fancy universities, and from those fancy universities had gone to very fancy schools, and therefore they weren't taking resumes for new people. And so
Yeah.
like it really took it, like if you've been here a year and you feel like you have a bunch of like nice acquaintances but no real friends, like you're absolutely right on track.
Yes.
Like
that's right.
I would
That's the
say
end of
that's
freshman
incredibly
year.
normal.
That's just like
Yeah.
that's where you
Yeah.
are. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and like so if she likes the UK and like wants to stay, and there's like a road for her to do that with visas or whatever, then I would say just like keep making friends and keep burrowing deeper into societies, because like societies tend to be like they like really important, it feels like. I mean, I can't believe on how much I sort of missed out on by not joining them, because the amount of people who I meet now who are creative partners, or they make TV together or plays together, and they met in a drama society is crazy to me. But if she's going back to the States, it's like, well, you should study.
Melody, do you get a sense whether she's from the UK or not?
That's what I was going to chime in and say. Because of the way she spelled prioritized, I think she's from the UK because she uses an S and not a Z.
She might be Canadian. But
She may be Canadian.
Yeah.
But she did not say where she's from.
Or possibly she set her computer like spelling to UK.
Oh yeah, because she's in the UK, and so maybe she's
And she's writing essays on her computer, so she's probably...
There's so many possibilities. We're covering all of them. I agree with you. First of all, and I think we should reiterate that having a collection of friends who feel somewhat surface level is so normal after your first year. Like that is just classic, right? You're like, I like these people. Isn't it weird how I'm not as close with them as I was to, say, my high school friends? And like usually your high school friends have been the result of like accumulated friendship over many, many years and experiences and that sort of thing. So don't feel like that you're behind at all. And I think even in the US, grades matter a lot less than people think that they do.
Really?
No one gives a fuck about your minor, for one. Like it never, there's not even a place for it on a resume. I think that connections and networking are so much more important, and things like internships, like if you're coming back into the United States context, like that's what's going to matter. And if you do those, like if you're coming back to the US in the summer, like that's what you do. Like that's what you focus on, is like, how do I get an internship and that sort of thing. And that's what gives you the stepping stones. If you're going to grad school, if you're trying to get into a elite grad school, then yeah, grades do matter more, but still not as much as you think they do.
Mm-hmm.
And also I think that like elite grad school is kind of a scam. And is not necessary unless you're trying to go to like get a Harvard MBA. Like it's not going to give you the tools that you think it will in terms of a stepping stone. Yeah, I think that this person sounds like very capable and very thoughtful, and continually like thinking about these questions is part of what's interesting.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't thinking about this at that point in my life.
I definitely was thinking about the like, why don't I have a best friend, was like so the...
Yeah.
You know, it's so very real to me. It's very sweet. But I will also say that I think that like one of the biggest things that university does teach you is like how to have a social life and a work life at the same time. Obviously, academic work isn't classical work, but the idea that like, oh, it's important that I go for these drinks and it's important that I get up at 7 a.m. Like that will be the biggest part of your life. Like it's important that I go to these client drinks, and it's important that I have a presentation at 9 a.m. the next morning. Like that's a huge, that's part of it. Like
yeah, and you're lucky in that like a lot of other things in your life are usually pretty easy, especially if you're living in any sort of like student housing or something. Like that part is simplified. And then you can focus on like, how do I juggle the social and the academic at the same time?
Did you like the what you studied at university?
I was English for the first 3 years, so everything about like studying English. And then they created a film studies major my senior year, so I was able to like transfer into that. And then I did my PhD in film studies, and I loved it, and I learned so much. And I think that oftentimes though we're like in that weird position of like, what's the cost benefit analysis on my major, and like, is this setting me up? And for me, I think like learn how to think, and then also figure out like, what are my skills? What are my actual skills? Because it's not necessarily like analyzing 19th century literature, right?
Yeah. God, I think about this all the time, especially when I see older people falling for things on Facebook, or falling for news headlines that are so like clearly propaganda in some way or another. And then I just think about like the media studies classes I did at university, and like that taught specifically media literacy, and like how I remember at the time, even in the press, there being like so much ire for media studies as like a thing, even, and that like what these kids watching TV all day or whatever. and like
Yeah.
and like, oh wow, now it turns out that's the most valuable skill a human being can have on this earth. Like it's crazy.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, there was so much like at first it was like, "Oh my gosh, there's a television studies class, must be
Yeah.
fun." And then it was like, "Can you believe there's a class about Beyonce?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can believe
Yeah.
there's a class about like Robinson Crusoe." So it makes sense that there would also be a class about
Also, the
Beyonce,
way those
right?
things are always pitched in the media when there's a Beyonce class, there's a
Yes.
Taylor Swift class, it's always
Yes.
like, no, there's a seminar. It's 6 weeks. It's like,
And it's also usually what it is it's a class that's actually like a race and gender studies class where the unifying theme is we're going to look at this with Beyonce as like our
yeah.
example, as a contemporary thing that allows you to access some of these ideas, right? It's not like, when was Beyonce born? Like, it's not like biography class. But yeah.
What is her star sign? That's so funny.
Did you learn how to be a good friend when you were in college?
Oh my God, what a sweet question. I mean, my kind of university experience, the Rachel incident isn't a memoir, but like the experiences are very similar in that like I had this sort of thing of joining this extremely bloated English department that was like, it was like there was like 450 students or something in my freshman year at English, and you would just never sit next to the same person twice. And so I
Wow.
primarily kind of remember the university moments of university as kind of wandering around by myself a bit. Like I remember feeling extremely lonely, and then my real life happening at my part-time job, which in the book is a bookstore, but I worked at a record store. A record store, not a record store. It was a HMV. It was a CD shop.
Which, by the way, love the callbacks to Empire Records that are in the Rachel
Yeah,
incident,
I
which is
mean,
also a
like,
defining text
I
for me.
wondered about including those, but I realized that like so much about being a kid who works in retail is looking about movies like kids who work in retail and acting like
Yes.
them.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think like to our question asker, like there are experiences that you open yourself to parts of this time of your life that are not necessarily rooted in the classroom. Like
Yeah.
you're becoming an adult,
Yeah, it must be
right? Like
hard
that's
as well to like be a academic, like be like an undergraduate in the time post dark academia, where I feel like
yeah.
there's a
Yeah,
more
yeah, yeah.
idealized sense of like what university is supposed to do for you than ever before. Like for the vast
Yeah.
majority of people going to university every day is like a weird little prefab building that's like kind of off the main campus that you have to walk to, and it's hard to find, and like professors just aren't that interesting and interested in you, and like no one really cares about like that, like the idea of the kind of gothic secret history vibe is
Yeah.
just such a like I really feel bad for the kids who were brought up on that, and then they have the sort of, oh, I'm at Michigan State University or whatever, like,
Yeah, they're just watching like Rush Talk and they're like, "Wait, where's all that happening?"
yeah.
Right? Like
Have you done a Dark
or the Dark
Academia
Academia
episode? I'm sure
version.
you have.
No, but it would be really interesting to see how that's influenced. Like my understanding was so heavily influenced by like this idealized understanding of the liberal arts education, which I
Yes.
then had,
Yeah.
right? Like I had this like the adorable small campus, like the classrooms that were only 12 people. Like I had all of that
Yeah.
and I loved it, but I also think that there are problems with that model as well. But that would be a Dark Academia episode would be really interesting.
Yeah, especially because it's like one of those things, it's a bit like indie sleaze, where it's like a
Yeah.
simulacrum
Yep.
of like a thing that is sort of real, but it's essentially like a facade. Like it's like it was never used by the people experiencing it, and it's a kind of a post-rationalized
Yep.
idea,
Yep.
I find it fascinating.
Yeah, well, and the UK ideal too, which I think like there's so much like Harry Potter going on in this too, like in the
Yeah.
understanding of like if I could just go to a Gothic boarding school, then all of my special powers would be recognized.
Yeah.
And
Gosh.
I would have friends for life, and I would marry my best friend's sister, and like all of that stuff.
And very rarely do these like, and like a lot of those books are like, and of course we knew each other forever, for we were the them kind of thing.
Yeah, like we were like bound in the blood of like our like
and very little is dedicated to like, and like, you know, I live in London, so I meet a lot of people who've been to boarding school, and I'm related to some people who've been to boarding school, and like I just don't think it sets you up in a good way. I think it like
and there's very little to like, and I was accessing hard drugs as a ninth grader.
Yeah.
Like that does not figure prominently. Or like, and then I had like a townie drug dealer,
Yeah.
or I slept like all of my friends and all like everyone slept with everyone and it was awkward.
Yeah,
Like,
or like I'm constantly afraid of people taking my food from me.
I lived on Easy Mac for like 6 months because the dorm food made my stomach hurt. Like
Yeah.
that never comes up. But anyway, Clara, we hope
that was useful.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
So you can look up my podcast, Sentimental Garbage, new episodes every Thursday. I have a book out called The Rachel Incident, and I have a new book coming out in June called Skip Shock, which is a kind of a sci-fi fantasy about time and love and shopping. So enjoy that, I guess.
Amazing. Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts because we have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. We're working on one about contemporary plastic surgery culture, another about period, specifically period pain, one about backyard chickens and farming, and another on whatever is going on in men's fashion trends, like very contemporary, everyday men's fashion trends, like what is going on with fleece vests? Will they always be with us? If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. And if you want to support the show and get all of the bonus content and an ad-free experience going forward, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. For today's discussion, I would love to hear about your favorite corner of the Irishification of pop culture, and if you have any elaboration on the theories that we posited within the show. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod. And thank you so much for your support.